Have you ever tried to write a song? If you're like 42% of my audience, then you've struggled to finish the job whenever you've tried. One of the best pieces of advice I've heard as a songwriter is to steal like an artist. So in this video, I'm going to invite you to steal 6 simple songwriting hacks from a range of musical icons to kickstart your creativity. Welcome in. My name is Matt, and I create videos that help everyone to write songs. When you're a beginner songwriter, it can be tough to finish your songs. Over the last 2 decades, I've learned that the best approach is to keep it simple. With that in mind, let's start with the first songwriting hack. Build on what you have. Stuck for an idea? Don't scrap your work. Sometimes the best inspiration comes from what you've already got. Just like building momentum, songwriting is about taking one step at a time. Even legends like Prince knew the power of this approach. Sometimes I hear a melody in my head, and it seems like the first colour in a painting. And then you can build the rest of the song with other added sounds. So how can this be applied to your own songwriting? Try thinking of each song as a bunch of small pieces that build up to something bigger. This can help you avoid being intimidated or getting ahead of yourself. Then, instead of expecting your song to be great from the beginning, work on each individual small step and making that as good as it can before moving on to the next. These smaller parts can inform each other, spark creativity, and help you to ultimately finish writing your song. Hack number 2, don't force it. What happens if you feel completely stuck? Sometimes nothing is working and you need to know where to go next when writing your songs. In this case, it can be best to leave the song alone for now and then move on to something else. This can allow you to avoid further frustration. Have you ever had that one song that you never seem to be able to finish? This can be the reason why. And if you've had this problem, then you're in good company. Here's what Neil Young has to say about it. I don't force it. If you don't hear anything going over and over in your head, don't sit down and try to write a song. You know, go mow the lawn. Sometimes you can feel like a song writes itself and it forms really quickly. Other days it can feel like you don't even know how to make music at all. Everything becomes laboured and it just feels like a frustrating process. These are things that even the most seasoned songwriters have experienced. And both of them are part of the songwriting process. So the best approach is just to embrace that fact. Wearing yourself out doesn't do you much good in the long run. So whenever this happens, take some time to do something that will allow you to recharge your creative brain. Now, this will be personal to you. It might be something that just allows you to switch off and not think and not worry. But whatever it is that you need to do, then just do it. Allow yourself some time away from the creative process. Sometimes all it takes is wiping the slate clean and starting again later. And all these other things you go off and do can sometimes lead to further inspiration for your songwriting as well. So it's a win-win. Tip number 3, write whenever you can. Now this might seem to contradict the last point, but stick with me here. Being consistent and turning up can help you to develop your craft. If you just come to write your first song and you spend 30 days writing it, chances are it's not going to be very good. Whereas if you spend 30 days writing 1 song per day, ultimately, you're going to get better at songwriting. Now, the majority of those songs probably won't be very good, but you're going to be able to try different things, different approaches, see what works for you, and ultimately, that's going to lead you to become a better songwriter. And this gets to the heart of something that lots of creative people think about, and that's the idea of quality over quantity, or vice versa. Singer-songwriter Bryan Adams hinted at this in the next quote. A songwriter writes songs all the time, whereas just writing a song can be done by anyone, anytime. So, as I suggested, the reason this is powerful is that each repeat of the process allows you to get a little bit better. In the world of YouTube, people often say, try and get 1% better with every video, and then you'll become a better YouTuber. I talked about the process of creating better pots with pottery, and it's the same with your songwriting. As I said in the previous point, sometimes if it's just not working for you, you might need a break from the creative process. But on the flip side, the process of constantly turning up can help you improve as well. So how do you juggle these 2 almost contradictory points? Well, I would suggest try and keep a regular cadence of when you sit down to songwrite. Maybe it's once a week at a weekend where you have a couple of hours spare and you can just go through and try and write a song. And if in that moment it's not working for you, then you can leave it for that week. But at least you've tried. At least you know at this time I'm going to try to write a song. You can also assign time to work on your music theory or other elements of your songwriting. But having a regular, repeatable process means that you are going to get better much more rapidly. Whereas if you take a more scattergun approach where you just do it when you feel like it, you might do really well, but the likelihood is that you're not going to progress as quickly. So there is an element of repetition that is really powerful when you're songwriting, particularly at the beginning. Tip number 4, create what moves you. A good question to ask yourself is, why am I writing this song? The thing that comes to mind isn't as important as how easy it was for you to think of something. That's because you're going to need some motivation to finish writing a song. And the stronger you feel about this, the more likely you are to continue songwriting and ultimately to finish a song. Adele has a simple test for this. In order for me to feel confident with one of my songs, it has to really move me. Let's say you're working on something and it has all the right parts in it, but it doesn't really connect with you on a deeper level. The problem here is that you might not be willing to put in the work to finish writing the song. Sometimes you need some sort of motivation to get through the more difficult parts of the songwriting process. And if you really connect with the subject or the sound or the feeling of the song, then that can really help you to finish it. Now, that's not to say that you have to be emotionally driven by every single song you write. There's nothing wrong with writing a nonsense song or a song about something that seems unimportant. But having some sort of enjoyment, at least, with the song you are writing will help you to complete it when the times get tough. And if you feel that a song isn't really connecting with you, but you want to stick with it, maybe draw inspiration on another song that you find really emotionally resonates with you, and that might be able to inspire you to finish that song that you think's good, but doesn't quite have that connection. Tip number 5, play the fool. If you want to be a music icon, then you need to be able to put your music out there. This means that you can't be thin-skinned. The best songwriting is from the heart, which makes you vulnerable to personal attacks or the strong opinions of people. Madonna is one of many artists who have spoken about vulnerability and rawness in the songwriting process. Songwriting is a really intimate experience. You have to be not afraid to make a fool of yourself. So as I've hinted at throughout this video, songwriting is an emotional process, and it can vary the level of emotion that you put into your song, the level of personal emotion that you put into your song. But there is a lot to be said for being somewhat vulnerable, particularly with writing lyrics. People like heartfelt lyrics, and if you're singing the lyrics yourself, it can be quite obvious if you feel what you're singing. Now, I know not everyone is a singer out there, and some songwriters just deal with the musical side of things. But your personal experience and emotions can also inspire the musical side of your songs. So there's a lot to be said about being honest and real in your music. Tip number 6, keep it simple. As songwriters and people interested in music theory, it's often easy for us to pile in as much as we can into a song. And by this, I mean a wider variety of chord types, denser arrangements, and sophisticated techniques that you want to show off. You know, you've learnt all this music theory, you want to be able to apply it and show people what you're capable of. And while some of your favourite songwriters might utilise this after decades of experience, it isn't required to have a successful song. And adding lots of complexity can be something that puts you off finishing songs, particularly as a beginner songwriter. For this reason, I recommend trying to keep your songs simple to begin with. But simplicity can also be quite difficult to get right. As singer-songwriter Sinead said, there's also simplicity in the songwriting. It's much harder to be simple than it is to be complicated. So keeping it simple can be the best approach to begin with. It can also be the best approach for the long term. And the way to keep it simple goes back to an earlier point of sticking to structure, sticking to constraints. If you have some simple song structures, you can fit your song within that. And say, for example, you're writing in a particular key, just pick simple chords from that key, even if they're tired and cliched, like a 1-5-6-4 progression, for example, and fit them within a well-worked and well-known structure. You can always add more complex layers later, maybe swapping out a chord or bringing in a chromatic note or that kind of thing. And I know this can be difficult for some people, particularly if they're really enthusiastic about learning lots of new things. But when you're learning to songwrite, simplicity is key. And depending on the type of audience you want to attract to your music, they might also resonate with something that's a bit simpler. So at least give it a go and don't dismiss something as too simple for you. If you're keeping your songs nice and simple, it can be difficult to make them interesting. You can generate some pleasing variation with different chord playing styles, which you can learn in this video over here. So check out that video and I'll see you over there.